Name is Derek Monson, and my title is Chief Growth Officer at Sutherland Institute.
So, Derek, I would love to just start with basic overview. We have our special session that starts at 6 o'clock tonight. How did we get here?
Well, that's a long story, but the short version is a number of lawsuits have happened due to Proposition 4 and amendments, attempted amendments to that proposition, leading to maps for the congressional districts that were selected by the legislature being thrown out in favor of some maps selected by a Utah judge. And all of that has created a lot of, political policy consternation between the branches of the legislative and judiciary. And so, among other things, it's not the only thing they're addressing in a special session, but they're wanting to address some of these issues regarding the legal case and the role of the legislature and things like that in redistricting.
What could possibly come out of this special session? Like, what options are there to potentially repeal the map that Judge Gibson chose?
Well, I believe the main thing that they're trying to accomplish, as I've understood it, I'm not a legislative insider, I'm not in leadership or anything, so they're the ones who really could answer this question more clearly. But one of the things that they're trying to do is change the filing deadlines for congressional candidates who want to run for Congress. And that will allow some more time for the legal process to play out on an appeal of the district court judge's decision to choose a map submitted by advocacy groups in place of a map approved by the Utah legislature. So I think a lot of it is having to do with the legal side of things, rather than, say, trying to draw a new map or things like that directly, because that's just where the process is.
One of my sort of overarching questions in covering this for the past several weeks is the filing deadline. We have a 2026 election, implementing a new map within that time by moving the filing date back potentially. Um, I mean, I guess my question, and I don't know if this is in your purview, but what happens to candidates who have already announced their candidacy that are running in the new Democrat-leaning district? What potentially happens to those people, given things are kind of still in flux right now?
Yeah, I mean, the current situation due to the judicial decision and then the legal process playing out is kind of thrown everything up in the air, and there's uncertainty for everyone. That said, any candidate who has already declared can continue the process of building their campaign and running for a seat in 2026. The uncertainty potentially will be if and when an appeal goes to the Utah Supreme Court, and there's even been comments that maybe taking it all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court, depending on how the Utah Supreme Court ruling goes. If and when those final decisions come down, are we in the same place today for candidates, or have things changed? Have the maps changed, or have the processes changed, and are the timeframes more compressed, which is likely to be the case since they're already bumping back filing deadlines. It's likely to just generally compress everything. And you can probably do that a little bit without a huge impact on candidates, but you do it too much and get too far into, say, 2026, and it will have a different feel for people running for office.
How, from your research, how do Utahns feel about the fact that the current congressional maps were chosen, selected by a judge versus the legislature?
Yeah, so we did a poll with Y2 Analytics and asking Utah voters about redistricting and everything that's gone on since 2018, really, with Proposition 4 being enacted. And there's really, I think, two key takeaways that are clear that maybe are kind of above dispute in the data. Number one is that Utah voters, by like a 70% margin, prefer elected officials or people really they've chosen themselves who are accountable to them as voters to be primarily responsible for determining boundaries of congressional maps. And by contrast, by an 8% amount, they say judges should be doing that. So clearly they prefer people accountable to them and who are elected over judges making those kinds of decisions. That's takeaway number one. The second takeaway is that when it comes down to the legislature and a commission, and the roles of those two things against each other, voters clearly want a legislature that is being assisted by a commission making these decisions. When asked, about this issue, 91% of Utah voters said they want a commission involved in the process in some form. Some cases that's more advisory, some cases that's more strict. But only 9% of voters said the legislature should be the only ones making these decisions without a commission. So I think those are the two things kind of moving ahead. And this is a complicated thing to try to get to this because of the judicial rulings that are in place. But I think what the voters clearly seem to be saying is we want our lawmakers, people who we're choosing, making the decisions, and we want a commission to assist them, and we don't want it to end up in the hands of a judge.
So it's not necessarily unilaterally being decided by, or what Utahns would want is not to be unilaterally decided by the legislature, but there to be accountability from elected officials versus appointed officials like a judge.
That's right. Yeah. And then with the assistance of a commission in some fashion to help the legislature, because the basics of it really is voters don't really like the current situation that has led to judges making the decisions. And they also don't like the pre-Proposition 4 status quo where it was just the legislature making decisions. They want something, again, where, their elected officials are choosing, a commission is helping them and maybe balancing out the process a little bit in some ways, and it's not going to judges to choose the maps.
I'm curious about, and I'm not sure if this was part of your study, but um, the feelings towards Prop 4. That was a ballot initiative voted on by the Utah people. Has feelings towards that proposition shifted alongside what has been sort of turmoil over the last, I know at this point almost 7 years?
Yeah, we didn't ask about that specifically, but I think what we can take away from the questions that we did ask around that issue is, I mean, to begin with, I guess taking a step back, Proposition 4 didn't have overwhelming voter support to begin with. Passed by a very narrow margin in 2018, less than 1 percentage point. And that happened while other ballot initiatives, several others on the ballot, passed by wide margins. So, I mean, it's in a clear statement, I think, from the beginning that voters obviously chose Proposition 4, right? That's beyond dispute. But they also maybe weren't. There's some uncertainty around it. It's not a heavy mandate, and so things that have happened since then, with things going to the courts and being so reliant upon judges making all the decisions, I think is likely to have made some kind of impact on Utah voters. And I mean, frankly, if the ballot proposition that the Republican Party is running is successful in getting on the ballot, I suppose we're going to have a clear understanding of what voters think about it in 2026. But I think the main key is that they don't particularly seem to like some of the outcomes that the structure of Prop 4 envisioned, because Proposition 4 included measures that were designed to use the judiciary to enforce these decisions on the legislature or to overturn decisions of the legislature should some groups in the private sector not like what they've done. And we're seeing how that process plays out right now. And again, voters do not seem to like that. So does that mean they don't like Proposition 4? I don't think you can say that from our survey. And again, maybe we'll learn that next year if the ballot proposition moves forward to repeal Proposition 4. But regardless, I think what they're saying is they prefer different outcomes. They prefer a different process. And what they're seeing right now is not what maybe they was not what they thought they were getting when they enacted Proposition 4.
So in practice, it didn't necessarily match what the theoretical potentially vision for Prop 4 was back in 2018.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, the main thing that was put forward to voters of Proposition 4 is that it would create an independent redistricting commission, which it did. It just maybe wasn't emphasized as much as it could lead to a lot of judiciary entanglement in these decisions by design. It was put in there for reasons of enforcement of the proposition, and now we're seeing that play out. And again, that's probably not what people understood to be happening under that proposition.
When like everyday Utahns, lay people who may just be watching this and trying to understand how, it's quite a complicated topic. And there's, potential discussion of pushing back the filing deadline, there being a truncated campaigning window. And then there's this turmoil within the state. How does that impact voter confidence in a time when there already is declining voter confidence?
Yeah, I think that's a very good issue to raise, and it's a concern. I think with the way elections have gone, going all the way into back into 2024, with how, for instance, the primary and the convention went in those cases, concerns about what happened down in southern Utah in Iron County, concerns about what happened at the convention, and the way candidates were treated there. There was already, I think, through those processes, some concerns about how our elections happen, and this, I think, adds on to that. And so, this is, I think, why the best move for legislators, not just for their own sake, but for the good of Utah and the good of our system, or good of our institutions of government and elections and things, is to kind of listen closely to what the voters want and try to reflect that in the final outcome. Because I think if voters see that lawmakers are doing everything they can, and hopefully judiciary, frankly, is doing everything they can to reflect what the people want out of redistricting, then I think it will only serve to bolster trust in the system, in the process. And to the extent that we don't do that, to the extent that everything is driven, as it seems like it may be happening right now, being driven by outside the state national partisan interests, whether that's, for the funding for Proposition 4 to begin with, the lawsuits, or the funding of the ballot proposition to repeal Proposition 4. If we can get above those things and try to find solutions that the voters are clearly saying that they want, then I think the message that will be sent to voters is we're doing what's best for Utah, regardless of what parties want, regardless of what outside interests want. And that will, I think, address a lot of trust concerns that voters may be having.
Finally, what are you looking for or looking out for out of the special session?
Well, I think we're just looking to see how lawmakers do respond to these issues, and looking to see where are they looking for evidence and for their thinking on paths forward. Are we looking primarily towards partisan talking points, or are we looking for sound principles grounded in our Constitution, evidence and things that point towards what is for the good of Utah, good for the good of communities, and what voters themselves would like to see happen. And if we're going in that latter category, setting aside the talking points, recognizing that partisan influences are going to be at play, right? That's just how our system is. But that doesn't mean that has to drive the outcome. And so if what I guess we're looking for is going to sum it up is looking for the legislature to show voters and the people of Utah that they're putting the well-being of the state and the well-being of the people of Utah ahead of other considerations, knowing those other considerations are also on the table.